What's up, y'all? It's Dev. Just got back from the ER with unbearable tooth pain. I have an abscess. I'm on antibiotics and I'm on painkillers, so this should be a fun one. The show must go on, basically. I have to do videos or else I don't get money to help me fix my painful mouth. So, gotta do something. So, I figured now would be a good time to do the top 3 new decks of the week. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, there wasn't a whole lot of innovation at the top of the tables this week. You know, we saw a lot of the same stuff that we saw in week 1 of Duskmourn Standard in the top 8s. But there were a couple of new innovators that really kind of stood out to me that I want to go over today, and maybe they'll finish a little bit better in the coming week or two. So let's go ahead and start with Gruul Delirium here, which I had labeled as Jund Delirium at first, and I realized that there's actually no black cards in this. It's just completely green-red, and that's kind of interesting. But yeah, this actually plays a 4 of the Roller Crusher ride. Told you it'd be good. Hold on, Dev. This got 28th place in a standard challenge. So the original deck builder and pilot did not do as well as maybe they had hoped to do in that event, but they still finished in the event. You know, they are a good MTGO grinder that decided to enter the deck into the event. I know I'm rationalizing a lot here, but still, I like the idea of this deck, and I do think there are starts, especially, where you can just get Delirium really quickly and start doing nasty stuff. It all starts with the 4 copies of Patchwork Beastie. I've neglected to put this in a couple of builds this season, and a couple of people have asked me why I didn't use it. I've had my reasons, but it makes the most sense in a very dedicated Delirium build like this one, where it's effectively a rogue elephant, 1 mana 3/3. That can start attacking and blocking relatively early in this deck, especially considering it helps you mill on its own. But there's also fear of missing out, one of the better Delirium payoffs in standard. I was going to say in the deck, but in standard, getting to attack with an Overlord of the Boiler bilges again is pretty gross. Being able to attack with an Altenac twice is really nasty too, as a secondary backup plan. And there's been a lot of games when I was testing the Rakdos Overlords deck for the deck tech that fear of missing out will just attack twice in the same turn because it's your only creature, and that's fine. It's 2-drop that does 4 damage, and that's okay. But it's really good with Overlord of the Boiler bilges, man. This is just a great card. It's popping up kind of everywhere in the first couple of weeks of the season, whether it's combo decks or mid-range decks or just the Overlords deck with Up the Beanstalk. It's kind of a take on Domain. The sort of Naya control deck. Have you seen this with a bunch of different Overlords and up the Beanstalk and Ancient Cornucopia? Really neat decks this guy is in, but he's in a bunch of them, man. It's easy to see why too. 4 damage is a fine removal spell, but once he gets to start attacking, he's really, really dangerous. Altenac's in here, along with the 4 copies of Say Its Name. Say Its Name will help you hit Delirium a little bit because it mills stuff into your yard. It'll get you some card selection. That's nice. You're always looking for, better creatures in this deck and stuff. But it helps you hit Delirium, and it will help you eventually get this 1 copy of Altenac, which is a 9/9 trample. So again, if it attacks twice because of FOMO, that's really good. But even if your opponent just has a removal spell for it, that's fine too. You know what I mean? You still get to draw a card, whatever. But the deck also has some good stuff on the bottom end of the curve too. We've just been talking about Overlord and Altenac for a while, but Screaming Nemesis and Wildfire Wickerfolk. Now, Wickerfolk is just a 2 mana 3 power haste guy, and that's pretty good. He could be a 4 power haste guy with trample. It's just absolutely bananas uncommon they printed here. But on the other side of things, a mythic Screaming Nemesis. I've had a lot of fun with this in a bunch of different builds. I've played it in Big Red. I've played it in various mono red aggro builds already this season, and this card is really, really good. It's almost impossible to block without losing the guy that blocks it. And even if it does get blocked, sometimes it just goes face. So it's almost guaranteed to deal damage. And they can't gain life for the rest of the game is good against not just life gain decks. There's a bunch of stuff that incidentally gains life, whether it's, Ancient Cornucopia, we just mentioned that, or food tokens and stuff. A lot of decks have a thing that'll gain life. Whether they realize it or not. But yeah, this early curve of fear of missing out, Patchwork Beastie, fear of missing out, Wildfire Wickerfolk, into Screaming Nemesis. Beastie on 1, probably not going to attack anytime soon, but still Wildfire on turn 2, swing for 3, Screaming Nemesis on turn 3, swing for 6. Those are pretty aggressive lines. That's not bad at all. But we've also got a copy of Torch the Witness in here. This is just a thing that deals twice X damage to a creature. And if excess damage was dealt to the creature this way, it investigates. You can kill one of your opponent's creatures with this, sure. Or you can just like make this a fireball with Screaming Nemesis. You know, you just deal like 8 to Screaming Nemesis in the late game or whatever and kill your opponent, which is pretty amazing. I haven't seen this card in a Screaming Nemesis deck yet, but like, good tech. Good tech, actually. And then to make sure we can get Delirium, we've also got Cash Grab, which again is card selection, right? Lightning Strike, Torch the Tower. These are all instants that we can throw in our yard, but, you know, we also need some removal in this deck. Roller Crusher Ride. So this is our late game kind of, you know, win now button. Not only do we have Lightning Strike, which now does 6 damage if we have Delirium and a Roller Crusher Ride, but Screaming Nemesis will deal more damage because it's non-combat damage. So Screaming Nemesis does, you know, potential 6, and if you hit it with that X spell or whatever, it just does a ludicrous amount of damage, like easy to kill your opponent in one shot. So just the Delirium ability on this is good, but note that we also play a number of like decent creatures in this deck. You know, we do pretty good early chip damage, and we have stuff like Boiler Bilges and Altanite to kind of take us to the late game. Roller Crusher Ride. Then on turn, like, I don't know, 5, it comes down and does 2 damage to 2 guys. On turn 6, it can come down and deal 3 damage to 3 guys, and now we're kind of talking. So I know that sounds like a 6 damage Brotherhood's End, but you're paying that extra mana so it can be one-sided. You know. Also, Roller Crusher Ride can deal damage to your Screaming Nemesis too if you're trying to do that. But you'd be surprised how often you play this card for 7-8 mana in the very late game and just like clear your opponent's side of the board, get in with the boys, you win. So, you know, Gruul Delirium looks pretty neat to me. It runs 22 lands, by the way, which is like really, really low. But I guess it's got like, say its name to find stuff. You know, it's got Cash Grab to find stuff. So maybe that's a good reason why. You know, but it's also, interestingly, you would expect at least, you know, 3 if not 4 Fable Passage to put a land in the yard. It does have that, but also got a Valgavoth Lair in here. So if you discard that or mill it over with a Patchwork Beastie or something, then now you've got an enchantment and a land in your yard. So again, there's some tricky ways to get Delirium in the deck that I kind of like. And then in the sideboard, Haywire Might, great way to get an artifact and a creature in your yard. Pick your poison, sorcery in the yard, but also just a slick magic card. 4 Pyroclasm against all the little guys, you know, and then Scorching Shot against Sheldrids and other 5 toughness things, a Biza. Balustrade Worm, awesome dude that can just come back from the graveyard if you have Delirium, and also can't be countered, so sweet against control, I guess. And then the 2 Ghost Vacuum. I've been playing this card as well a good bit in like different sideboards and even main decks of like weird builds, and this card is great. I suspected this card might be awesome, but it turns out that despite like what some people think is a dumb reference, I think it's a great reference, but still. Whether it's Luigi's Mansion or you know, Ghostbusters, I like the reference, but still. Yeah, this card has been very, very sick. It should be the one to have to go to the ER. It's that sick. But anyway, yeah, Gruul Delirium, you know, it's kind of our number 3 deck of the week this week. It didn't get the best results anymore, you know, to say the least, but it's still a deck that kind of struck my fancy, you know, this week as like a neat little pile that I want to mess around with. But next, let's look at Abzan Surprise. So this is Smuggler's Surprise, but it's also Abzan. This, I believe, was a 5-0 in a league on MTGO this week. It's a neat deck, man. I feel like some of this deck is obviously inspired by the Domain Atraxa deck, right? But instead, we're going a different angle. You know, we can just play the Atraxa. We can ramp into the Atraxa. That's fine. But if we can surprise the Atraxa out, that's even better. You know, we've got some other stuff in here that works well with surprise, like Spinewood's Armadillo, which can just go get a land in the early game and gain us some life, and that's all sick. But there's Harvester of Misery, which is kind of a sweeper when it eventually comes down, or a removal spell in the early game. Obviously, there's Trax. Everybody knows Trax. 1 copy of Aclazotz, which actually isn't bad to surprise into play either, because, you know, playing creatures on your opponent's turn is just good, especially when you have lifelink and they can block and stuff. But Vaultborn Tyrant. This works with anything that we could surprise into play with it to end up drawing us 2 cards and gaining us 6 life. And in my opinion, Vaultborn Tyrant's like the best card in this deck to surprise in. You know, every Smuggler Surprise deck I build has the play set of Vaultborn Tyrants. Card is just amazing. It really is, dude. But getting a Tyrant and an Atraxa really should force a scoop. And then there's also hands where you go like Tyrant, Harvester of Misery off of Surprise, kill like half their dudes, gain 6, you know, it's draw 2. It's very, very gross. So I kind of like the colors they went with here, because you don't often see Golgari Surprise. You'll see like Gruul Surprise and stuff like that. But Abzan is a little cooler, right? Here's where the some of the influences from the Domain deck come in, because we've got Sunfalls in here, just a couple of copies of Sunfall, 3 copies of Temporary Lockdown, and 4 copies of Heaped Harvest. So again, these are all like very reminiscent of what we would see in the Domain decks. So we're kind of porting them over. And again, the Heaped Harvest is evidence that we can just ramp into the Atraxa or whatever. And all these 5 drops are playing, like Harvester of Misery and Aclazotz, right? We get to those much, much faster, because we go turn 3 Heaped Harvest, turn 4 Aclazotz or whatever. As far as the removal package in here, apart from the Sunfall and the Temp lockdowns, there's also 2 Virtue of Persistence, because, you know, we got a lot of big dudes. And we also have a lot of removal spells, so we can use this on our opponent's creatures too. Not only the Virtue itself, but go for the Throat. There's 4 of those, 3 whole cutdowns, so really sort of, you know, accounting for the mono red menace in the removal suite here. But you have to, you know, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or, you know, 1 and 2 mana removal spells plus 3 lockdowns. So this person is not going to lose to mono red. They absolutely refuse to do it. 26 lands in the deck, as you may expect. There's an Underground Mortuary, 2 Shadowy Backstreet, 2 Lush Portico. These are all for getting cards into our yard. If we want them there, there's a couple of reasons we might want them there. But apart from that, they're also just to make sure that we get the right draws. You know, they've chosen Restless Cottage and Restless Fortress as their creature lands here. Those are both very solid ones. Makes perfect sense. And then in the sideboard, things get a little bit weird, right? We got Binding Negotiation. They reveal their hand. You choose a non-land. If you do, they discard it. Otherwise, put a face-up exiled card they own into their graveyard. So interesting choice of a card here, but you know, it makes a lot of sense because it's just 2 mana to get rid of a non-land card with extra gravy, and like that's probably decent in this format, especially if you go first. Kaya Intangible Slayer is also in this deck, which I love, just for long games. Throw down a Kaya, have fun. A 3rd Sunfall, a 4th Lockdown, a copy of The End to get rid of problem creatures. Elish Norn in here to double up your ETB triggers and stuff like that, because that's really gross with like Vaultborn Tyrant and stuff. Cutzel's Flanker to take care of reanimation decks. And then Outrageous Robbery, again, for long games and against control and stuff like that. Plus Elspeth's Smite if you need even more low-cost removal against mono red and stuff. So cool deck here, man. It's not really like reinventing the wheel or anything. It's just not too often that you see a Smuggler's Surprise deck that is in this color combination, and it's not too often that you see an Atraxa deck that isn't either reanimating her or just like domaining or whatever. So really kind of neat take that does eschew some of the newer tech like, you know, Overlord of the Hauntwoods and stuff like that, but still comes up with a really neat plan here that I like a lot. So wanted to point it out too. But the final deck of the week is Mono Black Demons. I believe this also 5-0'd an MTGO League, if I'm not mistaken. I may be mistaken. Sorry if I am. But this is a very, very neat deck that is going to look to a lot of people like it's just mono black. You know, mono black mid-range. We've seen it before, but there are a couple of neat concessions in here. And the first one I want to discuss is actually down a ways. It's Unholy Annex. So this is the pseudo Phyrexian Arena thing. You know, it costs 3 mana at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. If you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life. You gain 2 life. If you don't control a demon, you just lose 2 life. But there's also Ritual Chamber. This is 5 mana. When you unlock it, you get a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying. I've been messing around with this deck, actually, since I've seen it here. And it's really fun. You know, you're not going to win every game, and you can't really deal with enchantments or artifacts and stuff. So there's like obvious holes. But still, it is a really, really cool deck, man. Turns out that Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber are just good by themselves. You know, like getting the 6/6 demon later is great. A thing this deck likes to do is play out its creatures and let your opponent just run themselves out of removal, and then like boom, 6/6 flyer. You know? So that's it's a pretty cool trick to have up your sleeve. To just oh yeah, I'm out of cards in my hand, but I still happen to have a 6/6 flyer. How did I do that? Like now I start gaining life and stuff. But yeah, it's just a card draw engine that also has a huge dude stapled to it, so you know that's going to be good. But the deck really wants to have demons out so it can gain the life rather than lose it. So there's 4 Bloodletter of Aclazotz and 4 Archfiend of the Dross as well. You remember this guy, the 4 mana 6/6 that like if you lose all the oil counters on him, you die. you lose the game. But it also has this: whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. That's a cool mode to have. But since it's playing Bloodletter of Aklazats, they've decided they're also just going to add Unstoppable Slasher. Because, like, why not? You know, like 4 of both of these cards to just try to make that, you know, win a reality. But this is kind of what I thought would have to happen with a deck like this in order for Unstoppable Slasher to be a decent Magic card, right? It's not just all in Unstoppable Slasher, Bloodletter combo, tutor, right? It's not doing that with like 4 Rush of Dread and 4 Grievous Wound. That's not what the deck is. The deck is just mono black midrange, incidentally carries this combo and it can hit it sometimes, you know, and like your opponent feels like they absolutely have to save removal spells for these guys, but then that's a removal spell they don't have for Deep Cavern Bat, or if they do use a removal spell on Deep Cavern Bat, it's a cut down they don't have for your Slasher, right? It's a go for the throat they don't have for your Sheldred, right? So, you know, I kind of like that about this deck is that, like, yeah, they are heavily prioritized to take out Bloodletter, Unstoppable Slasher, and Deep Cavern Bat. But they only have so many removal spells, you know, so you're going to stick something to the board they do not want there, like guaranteed. And I like that, but there's also 2 duress in the deck to take removal away from the opponent and other like problem cards, right? If you want to take the like Vraska Innkeeper's Talent combo out of their hand, this helps do that too. But there's also, a pretty varied removal package in the deck, which you would expect because there's Archfiend to Dross, and like when their guys die, they lose 2 life or whatever. So you want like a lot of removal, but this person has really decided that they are not going to lose to mono red, or for that matter, the Enchantress deck, because this deck plays 2 copies of Nowhere to Run. So this turns off like Shard Mage's Rescue. It's completely useless. And in my experience, they will still attempt to use it like 8 times out of 10. They will still try and be like, oh, it doesn't work. And like, of course it doesn't work. But Sheltered by Ghost, giving a creature like Ward 2 or whatever, Nowhere to Run does not care. It does not care. And it's actually really, really good against that deck, while also being like pretty decent against mono red. And remember that it gives, you know, Cacophony Scamp and Heartfire Hero -3/-3, which means that, you know, when they die, their power will be less. So they're not going to hit you for as much. That's really, really sick. So Nowhere to Run works against like a number of decks right now, but there's also the 4 copies of Cut Down, 4 copies of Go for the Throat. And there's even a Long Goodbye in here to take care of like, obviously creature lands and stuff in control because it can't be countered, but just anything, you know, anything at all. From Monastery Swiftspear to Slick Shot to God, Liliana, you can kill with this. So there's a lot of good hits for Long Goodbye in the format right now, but yeah, just a slick little, like, again, like take on mono black here. Oh yeah, I wanted to point this out too. 4 demo field, 2 fountain ports. So the first game that I played on Arena with this deck, Arena decided it was going to teach me the lesson. They're like, you have Bloodletter of Aklazats in your deck, and that costs 3 black sources. So in this game, you're only going to draw 2 swamps and like 3 demolition fields and a fountain port. You need to learn a lesson that can happen. And it's like, yeah, Irina, I know that can happen. The chances of that happening are like slim to none. Yeah, I just could never find the 3rd black source for Bloodletter because that's how Arena do you sometimes. But I will say I have cut a demo field and a fountain port from this deck. Like, since I've been messing around with it, there are 20 swamps. I've still got the Fabled Passage in there because it makes some amount of sense. You know, there's 25 lands in here, but sometimes, you know, it still pays to kind of thin your mana base a little bit. So like 1 Fabled Passage makes sense. We got Fountain Port and Demo Field are mostly in here to take care of, you know, creature lands and to make sure that you have creatures and can draw cards. It's a pretty good card draw outlet too. So that was my keyboard. But looking in the sideboard, there's another copy of Duress for the 3 of. There's Leyline of the Void to deal with the, you know, Reanimator decks. Torpor Orb deals with all kinds of ETB triggers because we really don't like have any. But opponents have a lot. Withering Torment is to take out enchantments so we don't die to like Caretaker's Talent decks, drawing a bunch of cards. Cruel Claw's Heist, neat to have this in the board. Note that, you know, that last player was playing the thing. Look at their hand, take a non-land card from it, get it out of there. This player's doing the same thing. They're just using Cruel Claw's Heist instead. Preacher of the Schism, nice, solid little creature here. I think it's decent against aggro. And then Overlord of the Bale Merc. I have not been able to figure out why this card is in the board yet. I like what you sided in against. I really do not know, because I don't side it in against aggro. I don't side it in against like most of the mid-range matchups in the format. I don't side it in against like Domain. I don't side it in against Enchantress. So like, I don't know. I think it's mostly to be like card draw and just another big threat in like mid-range matchups, I guess. But I haven't sided this card in. But still, neat deck. Again, it is just on its face mono black, but it's mono black that's like kind of sprinkling in a little bit of the bloodletter combos here and there, you know, and doing some neat things to make sure that we have enough removal to combat the current meta while also making sure that we can get the removal spells out of their hands and stuff. So I don't know. I just really like this build of mono black here. I think there's a lot to it, but that is basically it for the top 3 decks of the week. I got through this without feeling too much pain in my mouth. So that's good. I think I'm might be helping slightly. No, it's not. It's not. It's still there. I get to fill my prescriptions at 8 a.m. I get to fill my prescriptions. It is now 6 a.m. So I have the weirdest sleep schedule in the world. I woke up at like midnight. You guys don't care. I just do all the YouTube stuff. You know, hit the like button. It's the one shaped like a thumb. You can check out the Patreon. That would also help add to the make my mouth not hurt so much all the time kind of fund. Anyway, I'll leave a link in the description for that. But anyway, guys, that's more or less it. I've taken up a lot of your time already. But I'm glad that I could be here. I'm going nowhere. I know I haven't uploaded a video in like 2-3 days, but I'm still here, and I love you, and I'll get better, and I'll make more content, and we'll be champions. Anyway, love you guys. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love. Why don't you be kind while you're at it? It's important to do both at the same time, not just one or the other. One dovetails into the other, but why am I still talking? I love you guys. Bye.